The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a game that I can only describe in one word. That word is not exploration, though it is that explorability that defines gameplay. Navigating the vastness of this rendition of Hyrule leads to almost non-stop discovery. Around every corner, behind each hill, inside all of those ruined villages and structures sit secrets, enemies, and more of this game. There's so much game here, there's so much to discover, so much to explore, but that's not the word that best describes this game. That word is not open either, though the sheer boundlessness of this game might convince you otherwise for a while. I'll not be the first or last to say it, but that iconic phrase, "you can go anywhere, you can do anything," possibly coined in describing the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, was certainly realized here. There isn't really a limit on what you can do. Climb mountains, fight foes, build a town, search the shrines, save the world, or don't. Just go hunt for fairies, fix clothes, buy a home, and just live. You are free to do whatever you want. This open world is truly open. But that also isn't the best word to describe this game. Hard also isn't that word. This game does contain many challenges and obstacles for you to overcome. Progression, puzzles, beasts, and bosses. There's lots of places and activities that are difficult. It always facilitates challenges for you, and always allows for the game to get harder. But still, hard isn't a good way to describe this game. No, the one word that describes this game is powerful. Everything in this game is given power. You have the power to make choices that shape your game. The world is filled with powerful creatures that will try to stop you. Fighting them can lead to moments where you're either overwhelmed by the power or overcome them for a powerful moment of your own. Exploring Hyrule, discovering and learning it, creates for you a powerful imprint of this world and its secrets. Explicit story moments and small-scale discoveries are all powerful and vital parts of playing this game. You get more powerful as the game goes on, and this comes from discovering weapons and tools that make it so. Sure, some challenges do rise to match you, but if you complete this game, you solidify yourself as the most powerful entity in the world. Even the story tries to tell a powerful tale of preparation, failure, independence, and redemption. After your own, or rather Link's own personal failures, he's forced 100 years in the future to fix his mistakes. Only this time, he's on his own. He has to conquer the world and the powers that hold it hostage single-handedly. All of this contributes to a sense of power that you feel whenever you play this game. As far as I'm concerned, that's an excellent thing. I love the progression that I feel whenever I play through Breath of the Wild. It's why this game easily makes my favorites list, and why I've been so excited about Tears of the Kingdom ever since it was announced, 4 years ago? Wait, that reminds me. This is a Tears of the Kingdom video. What gives? Why am I talking about its predecessor? Well, this is the first video in my review series on Tears of the Kingdom. I'm looking to try something a little different with this project, so I'll be releasing it in parts. Today, we'll be starting off with a prequel to it all, a final look at Breath of the Wild in order to precisely shape how I'm going to analyze its sequel for this series. I want to break Breath of the Wild into a few discrete foundations and talk about how I feel each of those pieces does, and does not, contribute to this game's greatness, impact, and power. So, hi, my name is Volcarinite, and today we're starting on a Tears of the Kingdom review. Welcome to Chapter 0, Power of the Prequel. I think we ought to start with the best part about Breath of the Wild, which, in my opinion, is the world of Hyrule. Simply put, the process of discovering and exploring Hyrule is very nearly perfect. The process of exploring Hyrule basically can be simmered down into a loop. It works a little bit like this. First, you see something interesting. You're looking around the world and something catches your eye. Maybe it's a tower or a shrine. Maybe it's a landmark. Maybe it's a giant freaking robot dino monster climbing around the outside of a volcano. But whatever that is, it's something that you make for yourself as a goal to see. You look at it and say, okay, I'm gonna go there. Whatever that is, I wanna see it. Though the footage you're watching is not my first playthrough, I still hadn't played the game from the beginning in over 2 years, so I had a fair few of these moments. For me, I noticed the divine beast Va Meadow, the enormous bird flying around the Rito village. I noticed it from the tower on the Great Plateau and immediately decided that would be my first goal. So, you move on to the second aspect, traversal. The single gameplay aspects that separates the bland open worlds from the excellent ones is the joy of traversing the world. One of the reasons I never really got into Skyrim is that I always found traversal to be very boring. Your draw distance is limited and your vantage points are few and far between, so seeing something that you want to do can be difficult. Plus, running around the world is just running. There's nothing to do but run and maybe get into some combat encounters. If you're lucky, you'll stumble into a small side quest or a cave to explore. Otherwise, it's just running, connecting dots on your map. Breath of the Wild is different. If you're high enough in the world, you can see everything. I mean everything. Va Meadow is over half the map away from the Great Plateau, which means deciding to go there is not an immediate appearance there. No, you have to work your way over. And in this game, that means some running, but also gliding, climbing, dodging enemies, getting into encounters, finding people and villages, making sub-goals, and so much more. Since it was so early into my playthrough, I was limited in stamina and health, so I wanted to get a horse. I love horses in this game, for the most part, so I wanted one to speed up travel and make it easier to avoid combat that I wasn't ready for. I ended up grabbing a horse, sneaking around some encounters but taking on others to grab weapons and gear, and slowly working my way to the Rito village to fight this beast. And that leads to the third aspect, conquering. You've made it to your landmark, whatever that is. But landmarks are rarely just things that you see and move on from. They're almost always a challenge themselves. Whether it's a mountain you want to climb, or a forest to explore, or even a region under constant thunderstorm, conquering the landmark usually means that you have to learn it thoroughly, discover its secrets, and complete some task in order to get some reward. And those rewards can vary. On the extrinsic or real side, they can be anything from the micro rewards of resources, to the mid-tier Korok seeds and gear, to the high-level reward of shrines. In my case, going after Va Meadow, I knew what the rewards were going to be already. Story progression, gear, and a champion ability. This was certainly compelling enough to make the journey feel worthwhile. There's also the intrinsic or personal rewards that the game can give you. These are more along the lines of a feeling of satisfaction or better knowledge of the game, or even just another vantage point to see more things. Va Meadow becomes a big perch atop the already big rock sticking out of the lake that makes up the Rito village, so I definitely got that satisfaction of seeing the world change and another place to see more stuff. Breath of the Wild basically mastered its world before it even launched. This is perhaps the tallest task Tears of the Kingdom has before it, replicating this loop or replacing it with something equally compelling. Though I haven't watched any trailers of the game since the name reveal, I do know that it's going to be reusing the map of Hyrule for this game. This is a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it's going to be much harder for this game to surprise and excite me while exploring, since reusing the map means that much less will feel new. Discovery won't be this constant and powerful experience that permeates the game like it was in Breath of the Wild. It will have to happen in bits and pieces. But on the other hand, the surprises could feel much more surprising. Because of the familiarity of the world, any changes to the way I remember it will feel extremely interesting and exciting. New landmarks especially could pave the way to an even greater appreciation of the world if handled properly. What I'll be looking for in Tears of the Kingdom is that loop of observation, traversal, and conquering. If that loop can either be recreated in an interesting way or reinvented to be something equally interesting, then that'll be a win for me. We haven't done this since the Celeste video, so let's try it again. We'll make a report card for Breath of the Wild. For the world, Breath of the Wild gets an A. We'll leave a little room for the sequel to improve, but this rendition of Hyrule is already so excellent that Tears of the Kingdom has a great challenge ahead of it. One of the perennial problems with the 3D Zelda series is its handling of combat. Either combat is too easy or too finicky or simply boring. Breath of the Wild does have some of these problems, though I'd say it's overall a success. I think that there's basically 3 levels of combat in this game: individual, group, and boss combat. Individual combat is certainly the easiest and most consistent. The typical enemies of this game are almost always bokoblins, moblins, and Lizalfos. They all move and attack differently, but they play similarly from your perspective. You dodge, block, or parry their attacks, leaving them open for your own. How long these encounters take and how easy they are depends largely on the gear and equipment that you have access to. But for most of the game, regular enemies scale in difficulty to match your gear, so they won't be too tough. Fighting individual enemies is a pretty rare experience though. Almost all enemy encounters happen in camps, where half a dozen or so will be grouped together to face challengers. This, to me, is the most fun kind of combat, because it allows for a much greater challenge and sense of freedom. Multiple enemies can easily overwhelm you at any point in the game, so care is always required. But because of the robust set of tools and options you have, there's always plenty of options when it comes to clearing out these camps. You can go in guns blazing if you want, but it's never obvious if that will work. There's camps with too many enemies, or enemies that aren't all in a group, so others can take you out. You can stealth your way through, picking them off one by one in the night while they sleep, which can be tricky but feels really cool. Or you can take advantage of the environment. Taking out enemies with boulders, explosive barrels, fire, lightning, etc. can be the most fun way to make your way through camps. For both individual and camp combat, you get both enemy drops and treasure rewards. That is, enemies both drop resources and weapons, and also often guard the same. Enemy drops are pretty consistent, monster parts that can be used to create meals and elixirs to aid you on your journey, as well as the gear that they were holding. Treasure will usually be either a rarer resource or more exotic gear. Both of these types of combats also benefit from the world's scaling. Enemies have variations that scale in power. This is represented by their color. Red is their baseline, and they scale through blue, black, and finally silver. It always feels natural. Your health and gear scales at about the same rate as enemies. This is all great. Along with this, the occasional camps of enemies that don't scale, that is, those regions with guardians, highlights this by being very dangerous all the time. But apart from all of this, and much worse, is boss combat. Basically, bosses exist separately to the rest of combat. They're always on their own, so there's no variation in strategy. You really just wail on them until they fall or beat you up. Some mini-bosses do scale in power, but the main bosses of the game, the Blights, do not. And, even worse, the final boss does scale, but it scales backwards. That is, if you fight the bosses, which are all optional, then the final boss gets easier, much easier. Mini-bosses sometimes guard treasures, and the gear that they use is always valuable, but on the whole, it's rarely worth it to fight them until the very end of the game. Their gear eventually becomes some of the strongest available to you, Savage Lionel gear in particular, but it's just not nearly as fun. And those main bosses are all pretty boring fights. They do guard story progress, so there's a little feeling of extrinsic gratification, but the fights themselves are forgettable because there's no variation. You don't have the room to experiment and try different things. This is true of both bosses and mini-bosses. Fighting them is very linear. You're pretty much railroaded into fighting them directly, and that kind of stinks after having so much fun with the regular enemies. On our report card, combat in Breath of the Wild gets a B-. There's some high highs, but some low lows. In Tears of the Kingdom, I'll be looking for more enemy variety and better boss combat overall. If Tears of the Kingdom can make fighting bosses feel fun and rewarding, that alone will be enough to get an A in this section. Puzzles in Zelda games are always interesting. Every game before Breath of the Wild handled puzzles in about the same way. Dungeons. You explore vast dungeons of rooms that contain puzzles of moving blocks, interacting with the environment, and a steady march through rooms to the end. These dungeons almost always gave the player a new tool at the very beginning in order to solve that dungeon. The dungeon acts as a sort of tutorial for the tool, which can then be used to better explore the world. Breath of the Wild doesn't do this. Well, at the beginning, you get your Sheikah Slate runes in the shrines, which are explicit tutorials, but those shrines are very short, maybe 15 minutes for the first time, and under 5 every time after that, and the rest of the shrines don't give you any new tools. This isn't negative, by the way. It means that the goal the shrines have is to play with the tools that you do have in order to get you to think critically. And because of the robust physics engine and the sheer manipulatability of the elements of the world, this can be a glowing success. Take this shrine. It's called Sherata, and it's in the Lanayru region, not far away from the tower. It seems simple enough. A crystal here toggles the water between two states, and you need to weigh down a pressure plate in order to access the end. But with your abilities, you've got a lot of options to beat it. The water means that Cryonis will always be a useful tool for crossing and getting good vantage points. The pressure plate is also intended to be weighed down with a metal barrel, so magnesis is nearly mandatory. You can access all of this information the moment you walk in. There's also a laser that's attached to a spinning crank that you can use to turn the laser. It can shoot the water toggle crystals, so you can crank the wheel like a snow globe and have the laser periodically raise and lower the water, allowing you to complete the puzzle as intended. But if you want to grab the chests, you'll need more precise control over the water. You can shoot the crystal if you want, and that works for a while, but you eventually can't reach it with an arrow. You can place a bomb next to the crystal by accessing it with a Cryonis pillar, which allows you a single toggle of the water. Stopping the laser spinning with stasis also gives you a second controllable toggle. These two combined allow you to get access to the chests and fully conquer the shrine. I actually don't remember or even care what's in the chests. I just remember how cool it was when I discovered that I could use all 4 of my runes to solve this shrine. Unfortunately, puzzles like this are exceedingly rare. Toyasha, the shrine in the Thundra Plateau, asks you to use 3. You really need stasis on the outside to complete the Thundra Plateau itself, and then you use bombs and magnesis in order to solve the puzzle on the inside of the shrine. There's also the Kamyatak shrine, which is a really long shrine that asks you to use those same 3 runes. Both of these shrines were excellent. The Thundra Plateau in particular was really cool because it presents a natural puzzle in the world in order to enter the shrine, and then another decent puzzle inside the shrine to fully conquer the region. That's where the praise ends, unfortunately. I went through about 30 shrines on my most recent playthrough, and those 3 are the only ones memorable for being good. Some shrines only require the use of 1 rune, some arguably don't need any. Even the Divine Beasts, this game's equivalent to longer dungeons, don't always need all of your runes. Va Meadow, the first beast I went to, really only requires Magnesis to complete, though using bombs and stasis can make it easier. Va Ruta, the first Divine Beast that most players will find, can be done with stasis and Cryonis. The Divine Beasts do each include a unique dungeon manipulation tool that allows you to modify the dungeon itself to solve puzzles. That concept is really cool, but the actual execution is very hit and miss. Va Naboris is the best one by far. Rotating the 3 separate segments to manipulate electricity and entrances was simply excellent. Va Ruta was okay. Moving the elephant's trunk to get water into different places to either put out fires or rotate water wheels in different directions was pretty cool, but I wish the idea could have had more chances to iterate. Va Meadow and Va Rudania were both, technical term incoming, very lame. A simple rotation of the body of the beast in both cases meant that the dungeon didn't really transform, and those moving parts could have just been done with your runes, which would have made them very interesting shrine puzzles. But as main dungeons, they weren't very good. The main problem with the puzzles in this game is their inability to progress an idea. Because of the nature of shrines as small-scale experiences that can be discovered in any order, the game has no way to ensure you know anything other than the basic mechanics of your runes when you begin a shrine, so there's no way for it to iterate on any particular puzzle concept. Because of this single-step puzzle design that's used basically everywhere, puzzles in Breath of the Wild get a C+ from me. There's something here, and glimpses of that can be seen in some of the game's excellent shrines, but those experiences are so rare and so bloated with the shrines that only require you to glide on the wind. Luckily, this is the area where Tears of the Kingdom has the most potential for improvement. New runes added to this old set will keep puzzles fresh, while its nature as a sequel means that it can hopefully assume that players have a robust understanding of those puzzle concepts that Breath of the Wild really only flirted with. Complex puzzles that require the use of many of your tools, like Sherata, need to be frequent and interesting. Long shrines like Kamyatak should exist to give players that dungeony experience of mastering a puzzle concept, and the true dungeons need to make better use of their unique movement mechanics if they exist at all. Otherwise, they need to use their length in order to iterate on and complicate a puzzle idea to make their completion feel like mastery. I'll spoil this segment by letting you know that Breath of the Wild gets an A+ in agency, no questions asked. Breath of the Wild is a game that was designed with the founding principle of giving each and every player the power of agency through experimentation. Almost everything in the entire game can be done through a variety of different ways, encouraging players to discover their favorite mechanics and use them to play the game however they want. This ties together all of the aspects we've already talked about. The world encourages players to see new things and go find them. Remember that if you're at a high enough vantage point, you can see the whole world, the whole thing. Mountains and robots and the final boss and the castle at the center of it all. You can see anything, make a goal out of any point in the world. Your method of getting there is always a choice, always an option. Want to make a beeline for it? Stomping through whatever is in your way to get there as soon as possible? Do it. Want to grab a horse and take the paths, helping travelers and dodging camps to get there safely? Giddy up, y'all. Or mark out other sites on the way to give your journey more steps. Take on a shrine to give yourself a fast travel point when you decide that something else needs your attention more. Or, if you're like me and don't want to use fast travel, then carefully stake out and conquer the enemy camps on the way so that you don't die and make it to your goal safely. It's all up to you. Combat again facilitates your agency as a player to beat up baddies. Enemies use a variety of tools to take you on, so you can do the same. We talked about a bunch of methods to take on camps, but here's a few more. You can climb above a tall camp using a tree or a pillar nearby, then float down to the top. Take on the enemies near the peak, then use your height advantage to take them out one by one. Throw a bomb to distract the enemies in one direction, then sneak by and loot the camp while they investigate the diversion. Eventually, when you upgrade stasis, you can freeze one enemy and batter it into another, taking out two at once and giving you their loot to finish off the others. There's just so much you can do. We already detailed how the different stages of those puzzles, which are well designed, can give you the opportunity to solve them in a variety of ways. That freedom, that power to experiment is crucial, and the game's willingness and preparedness for you to do that is simply excellent. Yes, player agency gets an A+. It's hard to imagine what Tears of the Kingdom could do to improve agency, but it's also equally hard to imagine how it could dramatically hinder what Breath of the Wild already has. So long as it includes new places to discover and new tools to play with, then this will almost certainly be the glorious strength of Tears of the Kingdom that it was in Breath of the Wild. Ah yes, the weakest element of this game. Zelda stories are rarely particularly complex. They usually manage to clear the bare minimum lowest bar of being interesting enough to act as a moderate motivation for the player to, want to experience it. There's a fair bit of lore in the Zelda series, so even though individual stories and games are relatively simple, big Zelda fans are able to interact with the lore in fun and unique ways to figure out what the world is, what events mean, and to overall enjoy the story. There are at least some characters who are usually interesting enough to be worth talking to, and the motives and goals of multiple other characters are understandable and maybe even relatable. All of this storytelling in most Zelda games is pretty much secondary to gameplay, but it does serve the purpose of acting as motive for the game to happen. The story of Breath of the Wild does not do this. It starts interestingly enough. As we talked about at the beginning, the main conceit of the game is that Link, the player character, is making up for the failures of an entire kingdom as well as his own. 100 years ago, the force of Calamity Ganon was able to overwhelm and defy the defenses that an entire kingdom had spent the past 10 millennia arranging, including besting Link himself. So, Link was put in a stasis to sleep and heal until he was ready. He wakes up, memory lost, and learns about the state of the world and his mission in it. This story sets up the potential for dealing with past failures, loss and sadness, revenge, besting of trials, and a climactic duel at the end of it all that is the hero's chance to right his own wrongs of the past and save the world. It's a Zelda game, so it was never going to deal with these concepts with a lot of nuance and complexity, but it could have at least touched on them. Alas, the story rarely even acknowledges Link as anything other than a body that wields weapons. He's the prophesized hero of the world, but he lost. Most of the world thought he was dead, and there are races of people in this world that were alive for that apocalypse, yet everyone who remembers him reacts with the same awkward startle that you might have when you see an old classmate wandering the grocery store. Their surprise at seeing Link not only alive, but unchanged, is relegated to an OMG in one line before completely moving on. Sometimes it's not even that. And Link, being a silent protagonist, doesn't seem to react to the post-apocalyptic world that he's wandering through. He gains some memories throughout the story, so he does have some recollection of the world of Hyrule before the calamity. You'd think he'd express some remorse or anger, or even a slight grimace at seeing entire cities wrecked. But no, he gets the same little realization animation whenever he remembers something, and that's about it. Zelda, arguably the most fleshed out character in the game, isn't even a real character until you start finding memories in the world. She's just a waypoint system. She can clearly communicate with Link and does possess some knowledge of the state of the world. Why does she never comment on it? Why doesn't she recount memories or battles in those wrecked places? And even those memories which Link does access are bland. Link is still nothing, silent and stoic, and Zelda is little more than a one-note quirky nerd. The failures of the story, the main driving engine of the plot, is arguably her own personal failure, but we rarely get a chance to experience that since memories are short and more worried about being cute than compelling. But all of this could be collected together in an ending that makes sense. This story is about a post-apocalyptic people trying to best the evil that holds the world and put together a new society. They're not hung up on the past. They don't care or even really remember the world from before. They're in this world now, and they want to make the best of it. Fine, that's great. Kind of irritating that there are people who clearly are stuck in the past, but whatever, forget them. As long as the ending facilitates that forward-looking progress, then maybe the story can be... Wait, what? The credits? That's it? Are you kidding me? The story of Breath of the Wild is a failure. There's nothing here. There isn't anything that compels players to experience it as far as I'm concerned. I didn't find myself caring about the main characters of the story because they're all dead. Those side characters are all one-dimensional chatbots with the sole goal of guiding the player through the story. And because of the game's freedom, all of that nonsense can be safely ignored, and much of it can even be skipped. The story of the game isn't just incomplete, it barely even exists. I'm not sure how Tears of the Kingdom could fix this. I'm not sure it even wants to. The idea of a story that can be accessed in a random order is a challenging one, and I don't know how the new game could iterate on the old one without making it feel even more hollow than it already does. And those are the 5 pieces of Breath of the Wild. Those 5 elements are the pillars that hold up the game. Let's take another look at the completed report card to see what Tears of the Kingdom has to work with and overcome. Besting the world of Breath of the Wild will prove to be the most difficult challenge that Tears of the Kingdom will face. I gave it an A for its novelty, openness, and the joy of traversal. The new game won't have nearly as much novelty, so it must make excellent use of what new locations and elements it does have while facilitating the acquisition of new experiences through the parts of Hyrule that remain unchanged. Combat is a place where some small tweaks could go a very, very long way. The freedom and experimentation given through fighting enemies is compelling enough. Just add more things, more features, more ways to interact with the enemies in the world. Combine that with allowing mini-bosses to exist with the other enemies to guard some of the more valuable gear, as well as just letting the main bosses scale, and combat has the potential to be excellent. Puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom can't just start from square one. It should spend some time teaching new players and reminding old players of how those previous mechanics work so as not to lose anybody along the way, but should quickly iterate and complicate those ideas in order to make all puzzles as compelling as those most interesting ones from Breath of the Wild. I sincerely hope that the new game doesn't do anything to hinder player agency. The ability to go anywhere and to do anything in this game is simply unrivaled. To limit that would be to worsen the game. I know that many people see this as a major departure from the Zelda formula, and that those linear games are what make Zelda games tick, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I don't care that Breath of the Wild feels so different, because it's so good. I only hope that player freedom is the #1 priority of Tears of the Kingdom. Finally, the story doesn't ruin Breath of the Wild for me. Honestly, I can pretty much ignore it in order to play through the other elements of one of my favorite games of all time, but I do wish there was something here that allowed me to bond with the characters in the same way I bonded with the world. If Tears of the Kingdom wants to do something with its story, then making characters that have real goals and dreams is a start. If Link could emote and, experience emotions, that would be neat too. But above all else, if improvements to the story aren't made, then I hope they make the story as optional as it was in Breath of the Wild. Because ignoring the story is easy, and the rest of the game is plenty good enough to justify doing just that. And that's it. That's my condensed-ish review of Breath of the Wild, as well as the framework for my review of Tears of the Kingdom. For a final grade, Breath of the Wild gets a B+, an excellent grade, lowered by just a few glaring flaws. So where do we go from here? Well, I mentioned that this is the first episode in a review series of Tears of the Kingdom. Over the course of the next few months, I'll be breaking down each of these 5 aspects of Tears of the Kingdom into their own videos, grading them on another report card, before making one final judgment on the game. I'm experimenting with the Volcaronite format here, so if there's anything you personally don't like about it, do let me know. I'm so excited to play the new game and to share my thoughts and experiences with you guys here, and I hope you enjoy what I have to say. Thanks for watching. I recently launched a new channel called Volcaronite Plays, which is a channel geared towards more typical gameplay content. Right now I have a Minecraft series called Curse Life going on, so if you want more content from me, head on over there. That's all I've got for you today. Enjoy your day and take care.